Ok, voy a compartir pantalla y voy a hacer mi presentación. Yo he escuchado, no sé si están hablando, pero me presentaré a mí mismo. Pero bueno, si no, ahí me buscan en alguna parte. Voy a compartir la pantalla. ¿Están viendo mi presentación? ¿Están viendo?
Sí.
Ahora sí. Ok. Bueno, ¿qué cosa me indican? Porque yo no escucho nada, pero sé que ustedes me están escuchando, así que primero que nada es un placer estar acá. Desgraciadamente no pude estar de forma presencial allá, me hubiera encantado. El C3 es como una segunda casa también para mí. He pasado muy buenos momentos con la gente, sobre todo con Chris, Stevens y con Alejandro en su momento cuando era el director. Así que vaya para todos ustedes un gran saludo de estos 10 años y que haya muchos años más, que en este caso sean, el transcurrir del C3 sea simple, ¿no? Y que siempre haya interés y apoyo por parte de la universidad y el país. Y yo creo que debería ser así por todo lo que se ha dicho acá y lo que hemos visto del C3 en términos de su apoyo a los grandes problemas que tiene no solamente México, sino también la humanidad. Bueno, yo les quiero hablar un poco de esos problemas me pidió Chris que hiciera la charla en inglés. No sé si efectivamente eso lo hacemos así, ¿no? Así que voy a cambiar de idioma y con su permiso. I'm going to be talking today about this, one of the problems that were kind of analyzed in the previous panel, and in a big way and also in a more general way, and try to connect this with the topics of complexity and also with the simplicity part of it. A lot of the things are we know about the Anthropocenes are very simple, but it is incredibly hard to actually deal with simplicity too. So simplicity and complexity are kind of in this little dance, in this tango, and sometimes the simple can become very complex. So what I want to talk to today is about this Anthropocene epoch, and one of the challenges with the Anthropocene is the trivial thing, or maybe the least important one is when it got started. So there are many alternatives, that people have been talking about, because it's difficult sometimes especially for geologists and people working in stratigraphy, to actually define clearly the boundaries between the different epochs or eras in the geologic history of the world. But we know that Anthropocene is something that eventually is leaving a mark on the planet, and basically implies that we humans have become a transformative force, a geophysical, geobiophysical force in the planet in terms of our impact. So one of the proposed dates for the start of the Anthropocene is associated with what we call this dominant globalization stage of the Earth that is associated with this, what is called the Great Acceleration. And it's around 1950, when most of the socioeconomic trends actually became kind of exponential, or more than exponential, in terms of the use of primary resources like water use, and also in terms of the population growth and GDP and fertilizer consumptions and so on. And also those have an impact on Earth systems components based on, or associated with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, nitrous oxide, also methane, acidification of the ocean, and land transformation, among many other forest loss, etc. So there is this kind of synchrony in terms of all these drivers actually becoming completely out of control in 1950, and also this where we have a lot of this new signals of radiation coming from atomic explosions on Earth. So that might be one of the way of defining it, but beyond that, it's very worrisome that we are in this kind of a global trend of exponentially increasing changes and transformation of our planet. We are very worried about it, and coincidentally, if you look at the number of protected areas and number and the area they have covered since 1950, which is marked here with a black line. Since 1950, the increase has also been kind of exponential in terms of both numbers and area. The green part is basically terrestrial areas, and the blue ones are marine areas, but this is just up to 2007, and we know that since then the marine protected area have increased. So we are being worried, and we are worried. There is a lot of consciousness about this in the press and in the media, and we know that it is something very staggering in terms of the case. I just want to show you this picture of the transformation, the degree of transformation that we have made. This is the impacted areas in red here, and in yellow is the protected area. You look, it's a kind of an harmonization of many different databases just to put the amount of impact. And in 1950, you have all these protected areas, and this is a global phenomenon. It happens also in Africa, where you can see here, you know, the scale of the transformation of the globe, and also how we have been trying to counteract that with kind of a setting line aside. That we know is one of the strategies. It's not something that is working as well as some would like. So this is then a global phenomenon in terms of its impact. So the question is, how is that we actually got to this point, that we became this strong geobiophysical force with a transformation potential so great that is threatening to actually affecting us as well as many other species and the biodiversity in general, changing the climate of this planet and changing us to the same way. So I want to go back a little bit. Well, more than a little bit, but it's like 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. Something happened, which is a singularity, which I like to call the big biotic bang, when a new state of matter arose, which physicists like to call it active matter. You know, active because it is active. You know, it's out of equilibrium. It's interact with the environment. I like to call it also, in more general terms, adaptive matter, because it's kind of like the fifth element, where you have this this matter that actually can change the environment, and the environment can change itself, and it has this conversation, this dance with the environment that is a dance that exists recorded in a cumulative way through genetic material, and allows for this history of changes to actually be, or this conversation actually being kind of internalized. And it's a history also of transformation to eventually solve all the problems that the environment actually put to this special kind of matter. So just to show you a little bit how this works, and which could be some of the important, I would say, principles behind this movement of life since its origin 4 billion years ago. I might want to used an experiment, a very simple one with an organism that's called Escherichia coli. It's a bacteria. The experiment, it was done by Roberto Voltaire, a professor, a Guatemalan professor in Harvard, back in the 1990s, where he put this bacteria in a flask and eventually deprived of food, meaning that he put the bacteria, which actually is important, it was an isogenic kind of strain, meaning that all the individuals were more or less, let's say, share the same genome. So this isogenic strain was put into this flask with resources, but no more resources were added, only water just to keep the system in, as we call it, osmotic balance, so it doesn't dry out. So no food. So no food, okay, so the bacteria grows like this. It's a lag period, then exponential increase, and eventually stationary period where the bacteria doesn't grow because the resources run out. And then you expect that the thing will start dying. And what happened is that it did decrease, but this decrease took a long time. And it was weird because after, if you look at the time axis here, after 60 months, which is equivalent to 5 years, you still have some bacteria living in there. So the question is, what happened in this experiment, and what happened is very interesting because the original strain, when it grows, it changes because it is replicating, and it's replicated with error. There are spontaneous mutation, and also there are mutations associated with stress responses to a particular genes that are mutating, and that can give rise to transformation of the original strain into other strains that replace each other, but they change the environment each time and make the environment different. So, and that difference in the environment actually select for a different alternative mutant in the population. So in a process that we call it niche construction, and eventually you get into a state where there is coexistence of many strains. So the important lesson here, we start from a isogenic strain, and we end up with an ecosystem with diversity and coexisting species. So that's why I like this example, because it's very simple, and it tells us that the way from to this diversity and its maintenance is associated with the process of niche construction, which basically means that the organism changes the environment, and that changes can go back to selective pressures on the organism. So there is this coordination that can be eventually moved around and eventually directed. In this case, is just due to a spontaneous mutation and using all the alternative resources that have been generated as a product of the metabolism of the own bacteria. So another example of this process, which I think is a kind of a general principle that might be taken into account when we try to understand this movement of living, is an example of domestication, of something that happened like 10,000, 11,000 years ago in the Near East, particularly in the fertile crescent, where we know that many different kinds of organisms like sheep, cattle, pigs, goats, and also wheat and some other plants were domesticated. And that domestication actually was reflected in things like big accumulation of biomass of these animals, and is a manipulation of the environment. So we manipulate the environment, we change the environment, we make the great availability of unpredictability of this resource, which brings meat, but also brings milk. And as a consequence, this availability of milk made that this mammal is no longer that usually is lactose intolerant after a couple of after 1 year of being birth, becomes after feeding, breastfeeding we become naturally as lactose intolerance. The great availability of milk due to domestication made that lactose tolerance genes increasing frequency in the population. So we changed the environment changed us. So that's one of the important principles that I would say a more nuanced and complex reading of the evolutionary pressure or process have brought us to understand some of the complexities of this world in terms of this reciprocal or the circular causality, as Hutchinson called it, or this feedback, or eco-evolutionary feedback. So the other principle, which is very interesting and that we take it for granted, is this something that one of the notebooks of Charles Darwin make clear in 1837, after he got back from the Beagle ship. He wrote this, I think, and he made this staggering picture here, very interesting stuff that I think very important too, very simple, where he actually mentioned that and made the point that all life comes from the same ancestor. I think that that's really important to keep in mind, because it means that there is a continuity in the process. There are no independent originations. And what we see today, which are the tips of this kind of phylogenies, here are the ancestors. Most of them have been going extinct, but there are these tips here, which are the species that are currently extant, and those species are transformation of this original biomass. So we know that this transformation have maintained certain regularities, and this transformation somehow is like they give rise to diversity, which are variation on the same theme, which is manifested in this very simple scaling laws. Like one here, which is another interesting principle, is the existence of this scaling law, which have been central to a lot of complexity science during the ages. Since when people start talking about complexity, they start dealing with these laws, both in economics and biology. And this is one of the one that has been proposed, or that is empirically it's very well known in biology, which is the scale between the energy requirements of organisms and the system size, or the size of the organism. So the size of the system and how much energy you require to keep it alive. And you see here that all of them follow this kind of or follow around the same line. There is new data that shows that it has a curve at the beginning, but in general, it follows this kind of tendencies to follow the same line, meaning that all the species are kind of similar transformation of each other. So a gorilla is just the same as a fly, but just by a simple operation of transformation, you can get it gets into the same line. So the equation for this is very simple. It's called the kind of scaling laws or arithmetic equation. You say is the square. The 3/4 slope of this as you take the logarithms. So it's very easy to work with this simple, very simple regularities. That's very important because it says that this diversity actually is related to each other. It's very kind of simple to get from one form to the other. There have been explanations for this. One is based on networks that says that these regularities come from constraints imposed on networks that have to deliver food and resources to different cells within multicellular organisms, or even within cells. You have these networks where you have microtubes within cells that actually are also moving things around the cell. So networks, this kind of networks are everywhere, and it might be one of the explanations that has been proposed. We're not going to stop here, we don't have time, but what I want to get you to is that once we know this scaling law, we can work with them and just predict things like the maximum number of individuals that can be found in an area will be just the amount of resources divided by the amount that each species requires. And this leads to this prediction that this maximum number is to scale with mass raised to -3/4, assuming that all the species use the same amount of energy. And in fact, the empirical data shows that the maximum density and weight follow this -3/4 law. So that's kind of a natural law, and we could eventually use this as a standard to make comparisons. And so that was very, very, very important. And it has been shown that not only mammals follow that law, but also viruses, bacteria in the sea, plants, sequoias, and the maximum density follow this -3/4 law. So this is an empirical law for which there is kind of a interesting data that not only happens at the global level when you pick up data on the abundance and size of different kind of organisms, but also happens within local communities, like here in central Chile. We did this a long time ago, showing that it happens in local communities too, and that it happens when you perturb. This is an experiment. This is outside a protected area. This is inside, and you see that the composition of the species, the relative abundance of them, is completely different, and yet the same law is satisfied. So, which tells us something about the importance and the resilience of the way these communities get together. So one of the important things about this law is that it predicts, as I mentioned, that species of different sizes are kind of equivalent in the amount of energy that they use of capture within communities. And in fact, the empirical evidence shows that very clearly. If you put the amount of energy that different populations within a community use and the mass, you see that even though there is a lot of scatter, but there is no tendency. So it's invariant with respect to mass. So meaning that eventually all the species use a similar amount of energy, and this also is linked with other hypotheses like the Red Queen and so on, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm going to just use this as a way to quantify, which is obvious here. You say, well, there's a mouse, there's an elephant, and where are we in this plot? So that's the important part. Here is a natural law that was actually understood because this kind of scaling and complexity driven research provide null hypothesis to see where we are, and we expect to be here along this line for what is be expected for a mammal of 75 kilos, but indeed we are a little bit an outlier. So 58,000% above what would be expected for a mammal of 75 kilos. And we have analyzed this and compiled data because obviously they have changed through the history of human beings. The expectations that when we were hunter-gatherers, we might have been closer to the line. And in fact, here are the data for mammals that I just showed, graphed in a different way, but here are hunter-gatherers, which are right on what you would expect. Pre-industrial societies and modern cities are way up there above what would you expect. So the question is, what happened? Why did we escape from this relationship? And then, which are the consequences of this? And what happens there? We know a little bit that this started 10,000, 11,000 years ago with this big exponential growth started, and as a consequence, in large part, of what we call this horizontal movement in terms of the carrying capacity due to this domestication process that here is shown in the fertile percent in Near East, but also in Mexico, Peru, and South America, different part of the world. And well, to some extent, this is just rediscovering the well, because this is something that is not an attribute of human only, but is something that is common in many different kinds of organisms. I will say three at least. with us is 4, which is termites, ants, and beetles, which have been known to evolve this mutualistic symbiosis with other plants and what we call agriculture. And so domestication is not primitive. It's like something that has been evolving through time during the last 40 to 60 million years. So, but something happened with humans, and that thing is very clearly when you look at the evolution of the human head. You know, the head has changed much more than the posterior cranial skeleton. So all the body it has changed much less than the head of the primate in this particular case, our lineage. I mean, part that is due to different kind of changes in diet, for example, that didn't require to have huge mandibles and jaws and huge muscles to actually crack things, and going into a more carnivorous, and also the effect of cooking things, you know, with fire allows to, this is the hypothesis that Lieberman is putting forward, to develop more elaborate cognitive skills, and that eventually, and I will follow here what these anthropologists have done in terms of considering human evolution and cultural evolution, whereby Victor Richardson and Joseph Henrich, in terms of saying or emphasizing that one of the things that distinguish the creation of culture is specifically the capacity to engage in social learning, which is not primitive of humans, but that in humans, given our cognitive abilities, actually became sort of a superpower. And they define culture, you know, as information, beliefs, values, and behavior that people acquire from others through this kind of dynamic of teaching, imitation, and other forms of this social learning. And that this creates this superpower that allows us for rapid cumulative modification of behavior and colonization of different environments and defining solutions of different challenges. And I said it's not primitive of human, has been shown in birds and also animals, and one of the most interesting kind of example of this, the monkeys washing potatoes, which is eventually a learned kind of behavior that one monkey started and then everyone else started copying in the population. And we know that the group size is going to determine cultural complexity in terms of that more people or more individuals in a population means that there will be more diversity and eventually more behaviors and more possibilities of finding solutions to complex problems and generating numbers of different innovations, as has been proposed, for example, or shown for the case of Oceania around the time of the European contact, where you see that different large unconnected population has the number of tools of this Indian or first people here is larger as population size increases. We have actually also shown that it was a case with a particular kind of complex society of hunter-gatherers in the Atacama Desert, where they came about with a artificial mummification like 8,000 years before present, which is completely not normal, not what you would expect for hunter-gatherers to actually do this complicated ritual with the dead. So what we believe is behind this is resumed in this very simple model here, where you have the link is, look at this, at the center is population size, which depends on the contribution of nature, meaning all the ecosystem services that are provided by the ecological system that actually allows for to sustain a particular population size. When this contribution are increasing, this population size is increasing too, and gives rise to a lot of people, of diversity, more innovations, and innovation also that will actually be designed to increase the flux of these services. So you have a loop here, but also you have a loop with the settlement pattern, because more people means that eventually, or more innovation means that eventually people will stay there and start kind of becoming more sedentary as you have more resources coming in, and you have to take care of that. So, but the other thing that we usually don't include here, but I'm putting in here, is that not only technological innovations are kind of a function of these population size, but also ideological innovations and coming about with new interpretation about the world, and which actually have an impact on the settlement pattern, but also on how we extract or how we relate to ecosystem and affect also the flux of these ecosystem services. So just to show you very quickly how these things pan out and which are the consequences of these dynamics in a very simplified form to humans, I will go and show you a little model here of Homo sapiens in a finite planet, and I will use the same analogy of E. coli in this flask, but now will be Homo sapiens. And we will consider the growth of the biomass here, which is phi, the state of the environment, which is W, or the flux of ecosystem services, and mu will be just this cultural evolution. Is that those things that we do in terms of culture, that we learn from each other, the innovation that we create, and that are working in a cumulative way to increase the flux of ecosystem services. So here you see that this is a positive side. I mean, there is a positive kind of contribution to the state of the environment in terms of that we increase the flux of this ecosystem services, but also there is a decrease. There is a minus term here. So this is pretty much the game or the big kind of game changer here. So on the one hand, we have patents and innovations and technological export, and on the other we have that this kind of behaviors impact or have an impact, a negative one on environmental variables like CO2 emissions, for example. So the play of these two terms is what is going to actually balance or create a particular dynamic, which end up very simple, following this kind of unfolding. You have population and economic growth that is being maintained by the ecosystem services, which gives rise to cumulative cultural evolution, which actually generate technological innovations and ideological innovations, which increase the flux of ecosystem services, and so on. And you have this expanding on the surface of the Earth and eventually taking over the whole system. And what are the possibilities of this dynamic? I'm going to put complicated plot. Just to make these 2 points, look at this. This W is a state of environment. Okay, so here we have a very healthy environment, and we have a positive population size. There is a very large increase in numbers, but it only happens if the impact of the technology upon ecosystem services or the state of the environment is positive, meaning that we create technology that improve the environment, and not even it's neutral, but it has a positive contribution to the state of the environment and the sustainability of the fluxes of the ecosystem services. Otherwise, we can be trapped in this other kind of equilibrium, which is negative impact on the environment, but is pretty much a place where you have very little technology. It's very nasty, but it's very little, and it doesn't replace itself. So we are either here with positive technology that is increasingly replacing itself and is like being, you know, in this Star Trek, you know, and here we are in a different kind of position, pretty much like a no-blade run or something like that. So this is kind of the dilemma. This is what we have learned. Several other models and variation of this that we have done shows that eventually kind of the same dynamics. And the thing is that at some point we might think of intervening, or we have to intervene in the system in order to move the world to a solution of away from nasty results. And probably where we have to act is in this loop and in this loop, because these are the areas where is how we think about the world and what we allow that as possible, and also the kind of innovation we have to do in order to improve the ecosystem services. So the future ahead is, I would say, uncertain, and there's people actually like Jeffrey Sachs that think that we are on the edge of sustainable development, and now everything is going to be perfect and great. Let the markets work. But there is other people who actually think that we are heading for a potentially tipping point when we reach near 8 billion by 2045, where the biosphere, the planet in its entirety, will change drastically, and the global ecological state will actually be less than what we are experiencing now. And this is the theory behind, is pretty much percolation theory, so meaning that eventually we humans will percolate. It's like we will be able to walk on a cement sidewalk to any part of the planet. Or there will be a highway to every part of the planet. And we will percolate, but the rest of nature will not. And that might be a game changer kind of phenomena. So I would like to summarize part of the paradoxes that we are confronting in this particular phrase by Kenneth Boulding, the economist that back in the 60s mentioned that anyone who believes that exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. So not all economists are thinking like that. I mean, Pankaj Gupta, you know, have done this wonderful book commissioned by the Crown in England to show the biodiversity and economy, or that economy is actually completely dependent on biodiversity, that we need to take care of it, and the nasty effect that all these global changes, climate change in particular, could have on biodiversity will affect the economy, and so we need to have a more holistic perspective. But still a lot of people think that any problem that we might eventually have, we will solve it through innovation. Complexity theory has shown that that's going to be very, very difficult, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And the challenge now is how we can live within, as people call it, planetary boundaries that allow for a just development of everyone, where no one is left behind, and also where the biosphere and the planet actually is still functioning, or is within this safe operating space. So that being said, it's been a pleasure to be here, and I think there might be some questions, so thank you very much.
¿Nos escuchas, Pablo? Hola, hola, ¿nos escuchas?
So there is a problem because I
Hola, hola.
don't hear anything.
Hola, hola. Ok.
Yo voy con una primera pregunta porque es mi Si alguien puede checar ahí atrás de la conferencia para ver
¿Le
si
puedes dar
se
el
puede
micrófono,
hacer.
corazón?
Bueno, mientras Pablo, yo voy a tratar de pasar, no necesito eso, ¿no?
Para que te escuchen aquí en la sala. Y además se está transmitiendo, Chris.
Vamos a tratar de poner eso ahí.
No, para que tú te escuches aquí en la sala nada más.
¿Hay alguien que no me escucha?
Para la transmisión, Chris.
No, bueno, ok.
No, I hear you guys.
Ok. Bueno.
No, ¿nos escuchas, Pablo?
Todavía. ¿Me escuchas, Pablo?
Perfecto. Ok, listo.
So the wonderful talk, just what I was hoping for. So I will take advantage of the first question and be a little bit abusive. So the thing is that it's like climate scientists, ecologists, we very, very good at describing the problem, but less so about understanding what needs to be done, and not from the point of view of obviously politicians need to do this, economic systems need to change, but it's like, why don't they change, given that all the evidence is there to show that they should be changing, right? So, yeah, I know how many different disciplines you've worked with, but it's like, I kind of remember seeing you with psychologists, or psychiatrists, I guess would be the more appropriate one. So basically, what are your thoughts about, you go to all the COPs and things like that, it's like, what are your thoughts about why we don't change and what needs to be done so that we do change decision making at both individual and government level?
Well, I mean, the evidence, as you mentioned, climate change and ecology, that's the simplified part of the Anthropocene. I think there's still people actually don't believe in this, but the science is strong, and there's no second thought, I would say, in the large community at all. The complexity is what we do about it. Some of the component is, or are, that this is a failure on actual collective decision making. That there is a huge problem in terms of making what we should have done, or what we did when we were hunter-gatherers. I mean, running around in small groups, making decisions together that were able to allow for our survival. I mean, I don't think that we are clear about what kind of decision, who is doing it, and this is a huge problem of collective action right now. And in part is my feeling that it has different levels. One of the levels of this is that we don't have the political system or the economic systems that are based on some first principles about what it means to be human. That there is no agreement on this very first thing. We do have this United Nations Declaration of Human kind of rights, where there's a lot of nice things there, but they are not respected. Because if we were taking those declarations to heart, a lot of the problem would be solved. I don't know. I mean, it's like it's also a philosophical problem. It's what is that we think we are doing here, or what is the world? And people don't want to build from that kind of questions, because those are difficult questions that don't have an answer. And they should remain like mysteries. But people want to interpret and provide kind of solutions which might take are complicated. So to summarize, I don't know. So it's like, but I can tell you that one of the things that is is terrible, or that is very, very kind of complicated with that is the density, the number of people, and how we live, and the settlement pattern. I think that cities are, to a large extent, are too big, and we are too detached. Even though we live in a huge city, we are detached from the rest of nature. And I think that detachment is really, really kind of making us more and more just separate and weird. And I don't know, it's something that we can discuss much more, but it's complicated. Yeah, that's a core complex system kind of question.
¿Otra pregunta? Julia.
Well, thank you so much. We did hear you very well. It's good that you are hearing us now. I was very impressed by the rule of the 3/4 and how human beings we are out of the rule. And I wonder if it has to do, the number has something to do with obesity and these sort of problems we have, health problems we have. Is there any relation between this number we are having and health issues?
Yeah, well, not really, but obviously it contributes because, I mean, we humans are now, a little bit heavier than the 75 kilos we estimated. But it has to do also with I didn't show you the impact of being in this highest density. And the impact is that our metabolic rate now is not what we need just to eat. I mean, the amount of energy we require to live is also associated with the amount of energy that we require to cook, to actually have a regulated temperature in the buildings. So each of us is in fact larger than a whale in terms of the amount of energy that we require. So the impact on the environment is huge. And since I show you that this rule says that these 3/4 rules imply that all the species use the same amount of energy, meaning that if we take too much, some other species are losing, and that is related to some other theory, which is the red queen. But the thing is that if we take so much energy from the world, some other species are losing their share, and there are kind of the extinction crisis. More than 1 million species are predicted to go extinct in the next decades by the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So we are in a crisis. There are too many of us. We are completely detached from nature, and it's a big problem.
Chris, creo que tú puedes cerrar porque es este micrófono el que no me oye, pero el otro sí. Ok, tenemos 2 preguntas más, pero usas ese micrófono si quieres para despedirlo.
Gracias, Pablo. Andrea Sáenz Arroyo. I'm wondering a little bit that in all of our models, we don't put the goal of the system. We are always like analyzing the outcome of the system, but we don't discuss the ideological issues or the ideology behind the system. I mean, we have been trapped in this system that is designed to optimize revenues, no? To optimize rents. So in the model that you present, where technology helps us to increase the ability or the capacity of having ecosystem services, we would need to change the goal of the system, which is basically to put a common goal. Or so, I would like to hear your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We realized that was a first approximation to the problem, because you have to put in, things like people making money, and also inequality. Not all humans are equal in terms of their contribution or their access to the services. But we just recently did another more complicated, or not that complicated model that shows that very interesting. We can have two outcome solutions of if you put human capital to interact with produced capital and natural capital, which is the inclusive wealth kind of vision of economic development based on Patadas, Guptas, and other people. And if you do the interaction, there are combinations of this that eventually leads you to an improved environment only if you actively produce capital that generates benefits for the environment. I mean, if you don't, it's not about harming, it's about we need to restore very strongly. Restore and keep restoring. If you are using, you have to restore. Otherwise, there is no solution. And the other equilibrium, and there's a very sharp phase transition between the two, is that we end up in a situation where it's like, I don't know if you know about this thing about this experiment which was called Biosphere 2. It was a biosphere built on Earth, mimicking all and try to have all the people there, being sustained by this artificial thing. It didn't work because of some problem, but it's supposed that we fix that, and technologically we just destroy all the natural capital, and we replace all that with produced capital and innovations driven by humans. So it's like living in a biosphere 2 within biosphere 1. It's like we replace nature by our own made nature. It's like we actually convert the planet Earth in the moon, and we live in a kind of station there. So those are the two big equilibria, which I strongly support the first. I don't think that the second one is an option.
Okay, thanks, Pablo. One last quick question, and then we'll let you go. And thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask you if we face a self-regulation macro system. So in the future, the economic and social conditions could be different to come back to the equilibrium, or what do you think about it? Is a normal evolution way, or we have problems, or maybe related with decision-making human process to affect the equilibrium between natural ecosystems and socioeconomic systems?
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely there is a problem in terms of decision making. Not that, I mean, typical, we know this, classical economics assume this rational man, is able to make the right decisions, and now we are much aware that rational man doesn't exist, but also we have not actually realized the power of collective action and cooperation. And probably the thing is that the only thing we have is other humans that actually understand the same language, well, sometimes, but in the same community, and we are kind of we have been driven to, I think, a type of thinking that does not realize the complexity of the human phenomenon of life, and we don't appreciate it. So we have to wake from the dream, or it will become a nightmare.
Bueno, thank you, Pablo. So, un abrazo muy fuerte. Entonces, Nos vemos en Berlín o en Londres el próximo año. Uno de los dos, o ambos. Bueno, abrazos, bye.
Gracias, chao.
Entonces, ya para la comida, entonces estará, so the food is going to be in the C3, so, you know, we could just go like sheep.
Pero nos falta una sesión.